Hey folks, Steve here with another monitor side chat video dated for November. Really, this is the chat that should have occurred at the end of October, but, so it goes. We'll probably have another one of these at the end of this month, around the holidays, if I find the time to do it. So this is actually the first time I think we've had back-to-back monitor side chat videos. That due to my month-long hiatus, or really over a month-long hiatus in the month of October. But I am back, and we'll be trying to get back to doing some recording here in the near term. I know in the last video I'd kind of mentioned, like, hey, I'm going to be really busy, I'm not going to be around for a month. Should kind of cover quickly that, it was all for fine, good reasons. I've been really busy with some stuff, saw some extended family with some of that time. And then what happened, the gap was longer than I really intended, and that's because when I was back, had some other personal stuff going on. It was all really good stuff. I should say, I don't want anybody worried. It was very good things are going on for me, and that's really good stuff. So it was just sort of a distraction, and I just really did not have time to sit back down and kind of reorient myself for recording. So I'm back. We'll cover some stuff that I would have covered a couple weeks ago, or last week, or the week before. We'll get sort of caught up on that. I've got a number of different topics to cover here. The title of the video and the tabs at the top of the screen will probably give some of that away, but we'll cover all of that here in good time. I do want to make a call out for what is to come. So in the, I guess, weeks to come, as I can find the time and opportunity to do some recording, the stuff that I sort of had brought up in the last video, the last monitor side chat, are still true. So I have Ted Racer's Case Yellow set up on my primary gaming table, and I've been really meaning to play this for a while. It just, for whatever reason, things are interrupting me. Every time I read the rules and I feel like I'm ready to go, something happens. And so I'm going to have to reread the rules yet again, because it's been over a month since I read them, and get myself oriented. And we'll probably try to get started proper with Case Yellow 1940. Should be a good time. I also have on my secondary table some OCS stuff set up, and I will not reveal my full plan for what is intended there yet. I almost want it to be a surprise, and nothing too crazy, but just something fun that will take a lot of the cognitive load off of myself, but allow for a nice introduction to the series and learning my way through before I tackle something like Case Blue, which someday that may be a goal. I do have a goal to try to play some of Case Blue on a table in my game room here, so that will be the goal. Eventually, maybe a long time from now, we'll see what happens. But of course, I've got a lot of other games planned to come. There's stuff really, I had picked up Fire in the Sky. I'd really like to try to play that on camera somehow. I've got the Korean War, which was something that the reprint from Compass that I had really intended to play, and we didn't quite get around to it. And then I've got both the latest version of War and Peace to do. I would like to cover that and play that, and see how it compares to Nations in Arms, which is another game that I would really like to do on the channel, just because I think I already really like the game, and it just needs some visibility, because I think the game deserves yet a real, true reprint at some point in the future, if we're just that lucky. So a lot of stuff to do, guys. There's always more games to play and enjoy than you can really process or have the capacity to deal with when you're in my present life situation, but it's all good. So I'm going to run us through some of the publisher updates, a few things that I feel like maybe haven't really been properly normalized, and talk through that stuff. And then we're going to have a really veered off the cliff topic that is a little different than the usual, but I think will be interesting to at least some of you on who may be watching this video. So first things first, we had the GMT October newsletter as usual. They had the GMT weekend at the warehouse. You can see folks got to enjoy that. And then the typical updates. They got some interesting sneak peeks going on for Red Storm Baltic Approaches, which is not something I don't think I'm going to end up picking this up. It's just not in my wheelhouse, but plenty of cool things. The counter trays are still in stock. Evidently, at the time they published this. Now I don't know if they're still in stock. Looks like maybe they are. I bought a lot. I covered that in the last video. Glad to have them back in stock for sure. A few other things going on. Some interviews. For me, the big takeaway here were the P500 editions, and so Atlantic Chase being a second reprint. I think this is like my opportunity to look into this game a little bit more. It is not something I would normally consider in my wheelhouse, but I think this has just gotten a lot of good words out there on it, and that makes me would like to see the component slideshow, but I'm not being presented it. I don't know. I've heard good things, and it makes me wonder, is this something to try? It's a little bit outside my comfort zone. I wouldn't mind it, but I just don't know what to expect here. I get enough of a headache dealing with keeping my convoy safe, playing World in Flames as the Commonwealth, so I don't know, but definitely an interesting one. Chariots of Fire, second printing. I have Chariots of Fire first printing, so to me, it's just nice for other folks to get. To me, the big one here is Baltic Empires. To me, that is the big takeaway here as the cool thing announced. So, talking to us, a big strategic game with a deep economic system built in. They're referencing Third Reich is like, it's maybe kind of like Third Reich, where you have to worry about your economy. Up to 5 sides, which is very cool. I like that, right? More players makes for interesting game experience. Dramatis Personae cards representing different actors of the time. And the actual page itself has a prototype game board, and you always have to look at this and understand, like, the game's not going to look like that. This is kind of rough. That's okay. I look at it, I'm like, I dig this, right? You've got Prussia down here. You've got Denmark, Norway, and then Sweden and Russia. Finland probably exists to some degree. I think they list out the powers in here somewhere. I probably flew right over it. Gosh darn it. It's in here, guys, I swear. Here we go. Denmark, Norway as a single, crown. I think they were, Denmark had control of Norway during this time period, or at least some of it. Sweden, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, that's the one I was missing, and Prussia, Poland, Lithuania being down in here. I like the vibe that it's giving off. Like, I'm really interested in seeing more of the components and what, like, the game mechanics will really be like. But I am encouraged by it. I like the big multiplayer games. It's sort of like, this is what's going on while Here I Stand and Virgin Queen are happening off in, like, Western and Southern Europe. You know what I mean? Like, I just like that vibe. I like the idea that this could be a good convention game. They can play with a lot of people, 5 players, interesting player dynamic. That it has that involved of economics and military and variable victory conditions for each player. That's always fun, right? The players are each trying to do something different. So I'm very interested in this. And I'm probably going to pull the trigger on pre-ordering this. How soon I'll get to play it will be very dependent on the convention scene, but I am very interested in this. It's very much piquing my interest for sure. Pretty cool. The other one of note here that was called out is Bear Trap, Soviet-Afghan War, 1979-1989. Afghanistan's kind of this very topical thing right now. Having a game on the Soviet-Afghan War is interesting. And I think there's another game being developed for the Soviet-Afghan War by another publisher. I think it's Compass. But this is using the Sekigahara system, which I don't know how well it all maps. Like, if you look at this map of the game, like, it seems very simple, right? In terms of, like, there's just not a whole lot of, like, the terrain is very simple. You know, I don't know what to make of it. And the reality is I'm not very familiar with Sekigahara. It's just a game I've not gotten around to playing or getting. So I don't know how well this topic translates to that system. I probably won't be getting this, but I don't know, maybe if I get a chance to play Sekigahara at some point and I really, really like it and I hear good things about this, then it might be something I look into more. But I don't know, interesting, just maybe not for me. When they look at the P500s on the horizon, a new bot project for a coin series game, I have to imagine that means some updated bot decks for some existing coin series games that don't have them. So maybe some updated bot decks for Andean Abyss, or maybe another one that I'm forgetting that doesn't currently have that. Maybe just in plain, who knows. Again, Afghanistan kind of in the a topical thing. New content for Commands and Colors. That to me reads like an expansion. If it's new content, I suspect that's... If they're saying it's like, hey, it's another game or another entry, I don't know how you want to... Like, content can mean various things. Could simply mean another expansion to Commands and Colors Medieval. Maybe it's... a Revolutionary War expansion to the Napoleonics. I don't know. Will be interesting to see. Speaking of Napoleon, they're mentioning the Napoleonic-themed Ted Racer game again. So they had given this teaser once before. So when I saw it again, I'm like, okay, well, I hope that means we're going to learn more about it, because I'm highly intrigued, but who knows, right? Maybe it's... The thing about Napoleonic games, sometimes they're just about a battle or a campaign. Like, oh, it's just, it is a Waterloo game, it's a Austerlitz game, whatever. So it could be anything, right? Strategic level, it could be battle-oriented. Coming from Ted, could be operational or strategic, who knows? But I'm very much interested in finding out what that's going on. A new Levy and Campaign series game, which... So, we've had Nevsky, which I have and not properly played, so I feel shame on that one. We know that Almoravid's coming out, and then... and maybe this is one beyond the one that they've already announced, because they had the Wars in Italy Levy and Campaign game announced already, I think. So this is like a number 4, or the third one is the Wars in Italy, that I do find intriguing. I just don't know, and I just read a book that leans heavily on the topics of that time period. So the fourth one could be, who knows what, right? I do like the idea that these are operational games in the medieval time period, or maybe Renaissance time period, depending on what they decide to do. I like the idea. I just haven't vetted it by playing it. And then Mark Simonich is going to have another operational World War II game. So for those who like that, another one's coming. I'm sure it's going to be good, right? I mean, I haven't played them myself, but my exposure to them is very positive. I suspect this next one will probably be pretty good too, right? Upcoming events, there's a couple different things. That's the HISCon, which is going on tomorrow, because I'm recording this on the 11th of November. A few other things that I'm not terribly invested in at the moment, but when we look at the production schedule, it's really like the next thing they've got going on. So what's currently going out, or has been going out since earlier, is they had Absolute War going out, the second printing of MBT, Normandy 44 reprint, a couple other items. Stuff that's going out this month and within the last week and a half are the Panzer reprints. Whoops, didn't mean to open that, but that's fine. 1848 Australia, if you like 18X games. Wing Leader Supremacy. So a couple things I'm not terribly invested in, but because I already have these, I already have them. First editions and whatnot, or second printing of the main game and first printings of the expansions. So not much to do for me there. Then if I look at the production outlook, right, I think this is always the thing. I like to check in on what is coming of interest. So more of it is on its way. It's loading to ship. Conquest and Consequence is actually, out of this list of stuff coming out, is the game that I am awaiting. So, oh, that hyperlink did not work. Did I just click the wrong one? Nope, they just put the wrong hyperlink on Conquest and Consequence. Okay. So Conquest and Consequence, if you're unfamiliar, is the sibling game to Triumph and Tragedy, which I'm going to assume that this one works. And Triumph and Tragedy is a fun block game. I don't really play or like block games very much, but this is one that I will play. It's pretty enjoyable, and with the right set of folks playing. You're not going to get World War II. You're going to get something weird that is quite unlike World War II many of the time, and that's sort of its sandbox nature. And so ultimately, and I wonder if there'll be a link in here. Nope, not to it. Gosh. Let's see if we can't pull it up. There we go. Conquest and Consequence is the Pacific version of the system, and so I think they had final map preview here. There we go. You can see it's the Pacific. Very zoomed out. You see you have the spots that denote island chain. So the Marshalls and Kwajalein are this whole space here is probably how they're going to treat it, and you can have whole sets of blocks in that space and so on and so forth. So I'll be going in relatively blind. I haven't looked into how they're handling a lot of things for the Pacific Theater, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays and how well will it play alongside its sibling game. I don't think it's planned for them to connect, which is a real bummer, but the box art is interesting. Green color, which I appreciate, or olive, I guess I should say. So yeah, we'll see how that goes with that one. And then the next things in the pipeline, which are at the printer, no ship date yet, are the Pacific War reprint, eagerly awaiting that. The U.S. Civil War second printing, which is going to be good for those who are purchasing the upgrade kit, like I am. I'm looking forward to the upgrade kit. Really looking forward to it. This is actually one I would like to get to the table. I already like the game, I can tell you, spoilers, but would be fun to do something solo on camera. And then the Vietnam reprint, which will be very interesting to get. Also looking at the CDG solo system, just to have the constructed components for that. You can always play it anyway. The Fire and Lake expansion also coming, going to the printer this month, and the Great Battles of Julius Caesar. So there's a bunch of cool stuff always in the pipeline for GMT. They've got so much going on. Musket and Pike dual pack, Next War Supplement 3, that stuff I'm certainly looking forward to. I haven't done much Next War coverage on the channel at all, but I should at some point in the future. Moving on from GMT, Compass hasn't put out a whole lot of new stuff on their main webpage necessarily, but if you're following their Facebook, social media profiles, they seem to be doing a lot more there. That it's not as easy to talk to. Like there's, looking at their pre-order page, like there's stuff in here, but not the new stuff that I really wanted to talk to, which is the Europe in Turmoil sequel. So Europe in Turmoil is a CDG game that kind of riffs off of Twilight Struggle, but is set in the time frame leading up to World War I, so it's got a very different sort of flavor, and there's certain mechanics that just operate a little bit differently, though it is very similar to Twilight Struggle. I really like it. My rating is a 10. I really liked it. I like it more than Twilight Struggle. I did, partly because of the theme, the time frame. I really enjoy this game. So I think it was the Facebook feed, there was a preview of Europe in Turmoil 2, the interbellum years, 1920 to 1939, and they did show a map preview. It looks like, yeah, it's replicated here, so we can take a look at the latest game board and see how big this picture gets. Oh, that's big. Okay, so you see there's certainly, it is set up the same in terms of you're going to have influence points for the blue player, and you're going to have influence points for the red player. If I look at some of the charts on the far right, you can see there's a Roaring Twenties period, a Great Depression period, and then an appeasement period. And tension marker system, so that's very much like the first European Turmoil game, which kind of triggers when World War II will begin, I suspect, and having influence over the game. So, interesting to see how they're going to adapt. I mean, it's one thing to adapt the system that we understand, like the Twilight Struggle CDG system. It's another to try to understand, like, well, how will this apply to the interbellum period? So you have, in terms of the scoring regions, it looks like there's French, German, those are sort of obvious good ones, Italy, Italian scoring, the Little Entente, kind of interesting, UK, and Spain, Spanish scoring. You see, there's not a Russian one, so it'll be interesting to see like what role Russia has, if any, in any of this. The USSR is a space, but it's just a space. If you're familiar with European Turmoil, first one, Russia was a very important region for that game. So I think the great question for this is going to be, does this game adapt the time period as well as European Turmoil 1 did? I hope so. I mean, I think there's there's certainly a lot of potential here, and there's this event chart, and I can't make heads or tails of it yet, but there's enough of these things where it's like, oh, that'll be interesting to see. What can you do? What can you change? Because in European Turmoil 1, you could have a situation where Italy stays allied with Germany and Austria, and that has an effect on the game, and a bunch of stuff like that. So, I'm looking forward to it. As soon as they actually put the pre-order page up on Compass Games website, I will probably pre-order this. I think Chris Van Bearden, if I'm pronouncing that right, I hope I am. I think Chris did a phenomenal job with the European Turmoil. I can look past, you can look at a game that uses a system from another game and say, well, is it its own game? And I think the really important thing that Chris did is, he used a system that was tried and true and works, in terms of Twilight Struggle. But he adapted it so well to the subject matter that he cared about that it created a really great game. So, the system's not an original system, but it is a well-calibrated implementation of that system for a really fun game. And I think this has the potential to be just as good. So I'm really looking forward to it. I hope we see this come out on pre-order or whatever. Maybe some more investigation. Looks like there is a playtest rulebook I should look into, but I'm very enthused by the fact that this is a sequel that is going to happen, or very likely to happen, at any rate. Next thing I want to talk about, and it is kind of an interesting topic that maybe we'll talk a lot more about in time, is Decision Games has their pledge program. I've run into some weird attitudes when it comes to certain things from Decision, but one thing that I'm not too worried about is Axis Empires Ultimate Edition. Apparently that's what they're calling it. It's gone through a couple different name versions or ways to refer to it over the years. And I say years, I do mean that. This is a project that has taken different forms. And in fact, this whole product originated, if you talk about the lineage, I believe it was called, in its very first iteration, a game called Krieg, ! Then I think it became Totaler Krieg, and then it became Axis Empires : Totaler Krieg, which is sort of the last major version that came out. Decision did it, comes in a big rectangle box, comes with a lot of stuff, covers the European theater, and then they did Axis Empires Daisenso, which is really the first Asia-Pacific version of the system that I think had existed. There was no previous version of Daisenso before this one came out back in 2011, which is, 10 years ago. And it does the Pacific, and it's got, all the things, in the same sort of spirit of the Totaler Krieg stuff. And if you've not watched Wise Guy History's videos on this, I do recommend checking it out, because I think he does a good job of walking through kind of the way the game works a little bit. So those were the two games, and you could play them side by side-ish together. That was kind of the way you could approach it if you really wanted to. Where the Ultimate Edition, the intent is, you can see the price point, right? $320 for retail, $240 for pledge. So there is a pretty good incentive to pledge. That is... It is not as expensive as World in Flames. I'll say that. Maybe the base classic World in Flames, but if you're going to buy World in Flames, you got to, I think, buy the deluxe edition, and then you're spending a whole lot more money. So $240, if you get in on it sooner, seems like a pretty good deal, knowing that you're really getting two games. You're getting Axis Empires Total Greed, you're getting Axis Empires Daisenso. And they refer to this Ultimate Edition because it includes a lot of stuff that were originally intended, I guess, to be expansions. And in fact, if you go out to Board Game Geek, like, this product, its page is really this, Axis Empires Expanded Edition, 2022, and they kind of talk to, what's coming in here, but not with a whole lot of pictures. So this is the Ultimate Edition. It's going to come, it's a new spruced up version of the 2011 games, with poker-sized cards and 5 new full-color rule booklets with optional rules and scenarios, new stuff to enjoy out of the two games put together in one big, massive product. But then there are the expansions, the stuff that was supposed to be published but never quite did, and they just said, well, we're just going to put it all together and just make the ultimate package, which I like that, right? I like the big all-inclusive packages of stuff. What can I say? I'm a buy in bulk guy for war games. So first, well, they say second, right? Okay, first of all, it's the new game. Great. Second, there's Schiff's Creek, an air and naval expansion that provides additional detail for players who want more from the game beyond the abstract support units. Now players must base their air assets and ships down to the cruiser level on the map and move them to respond to threats. Air-naval combat, commerce raiding, anti-submarine warfare, and naval construction are all accounted for while preserving the Krieg design elegance that you know and love. To me, I think this is a very important expansion. It's totally optional, right? You can play without it, as the games that are understood today in the level of detail that you have. If you look here, there's not a huge amount of counter density. Like, there's a German Air Force counter, and that Air Force counter has a range of 3, so you go 1, 2, 3, and that means this air unit can support combats within that range, and it's just always providing some level of column shift. It's like a support marker. That's all it really is. With Schiff's Krieg, you have the potential to actually have air combat and opposing forces, ships that are a little more tactical. So it gets you, just based off of the description, right, where you have commerce rating, anti-submarine warfare and all of that, that gets you awfully close to approaching something more along the lines of a World in Flames. Now, that might not be for everybody, and if you're like, hey, I just like the Axis Empires as is, then you probably don't really need to worry about it. But I really like the idea that they are going to have an expansion for you to get to that level of detail if you like that stuff. And, I play World in Flames, so I'm used to options. So, I like that. That seems very cool. I don't know how well vetted it is. I'll reveal a few things here in a moment, but based on what I've seen, it looks fine. I think it'll be a good enhancement for those who want this game to be a little bit more in depth beyond just the ground warfare. And I think it's really going to help the Pacific War, because the Daisenso game, as we understand it today, is focused a lot on the Chinese front. The Pacific Island stuff is just not treated in a whole lot of detail. I think the Schiff's Creek expansion will provide some level of granularity there that folks are maybe wanting, and will strike that good balance. And then the final thing is, and this is for me, really the main draw of the whole game and package, is Dice of Decision 2, a much expanded update to the random campaign generator featured in the original version of Total Krieg! ! This meaning the version of Total Krieg before the Axis Empires : was added, so a distinct version of the game. As before, you'll be able to create new, different Second World Wars based on alternate history paths from the Great War in the 1920s and 30s. What if the Tsar still ruled Russia? What if Germany had won the war in 1917? What if there had been a Great Depression? New for DoD2 is everything related to Asia and the Pacific. Now you'll be able to explore the alternate Pacific Wars. What if there was no Washington Naval Treaty? What if Japan's 1931 involvement in Manchuria had unfolded differently? What if Gandhi had gained independence for India, or at least earlier than maybe had occurred? Naturally, your alt history, Europe, and Pacific games will still link to tell a completely original global war story. Blah, blah, blah. That's what the game has. 2,300, or really 2,400 counters, 500 cards, blah, 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 blah. So, I call attention to this game for a couple of reasons. One, World in Flames may not be for everybody. Now, World in Flames is still like my number one game. It's the, if I had to pick one game to keep for Desert Island, World in Flames, sure, yeah, that would be it. That is my game. But it's also very complicated, and it can be very trying on folks, because a lot of the logistical stuff can be a bit of a chore. In fact, sometimes I really dislike doing production in World of Flames, because it can be a pain in the butt sometimes. In Axis Empires Ultimate Edition, though the box art is oh god, it's so fascist. The eagle, it's fine. This has a nice potential for being an alternative for the times when it's like, hey, listen, we don't want to play this game for 3 years, right? We want to get in and out of this in maybe less than a year of playing, right? Play once a month for 8 hours or whatever cadence. That it is not going to take you as long. It is in some ways more simple. There's a few mechanic aspects that to me are kind of complex in their own way, but it's a nice alternative. So I don't think Axis Empires Ultimate Edition would dethrone World in Flames for me, but I really like the idea of having it as an alternative, where World in Flames is going to burn out a buddy of mine, I'm sure, and this might just be an easier way to deal with it. The production model and how production is done is handled very differently, and I think maybe probably a lot easier on a lot of folks, that maybe that's the approach to take with it. This would be a better game for certain people. And the other thing is, for me, the random campaign generator is very cool. Very cool. I very much like the idea of that. And I had, via the power of the Internet's Wayback Machine, I had found the PDF of the original Totaler Krieg random campaign generator rules. And I had been doing some analysis of them, taking a look at them, reading through them, playing out some scenarios, which was interesting to see, okay, well, what happens if X, Y, Z, and you roll through all the tables. And it was really interesting. It was very cool. And then one of the developers or designers, Thomas Prowell, who I actually know, I've met him a number of times. He's a great guy. Lives out my direction, and so we have an opportunity maybe to get together at some point. He had reached out to me based on some comments on social media where I was kind of talking about Axis Empires a little bit, and just my interest in it because of the Dice of Decision stuff. And he let me have a look at the components and the rules for this Ultimate Edition. So a little bit of a disclosure then, right? I have been in some level of contact with the designer. He's part of my local game scene, so it's kind of hard not to talk to Tom at some point. Well, he let me take a look at some stuff. He sent me a link to some files, and I got to take a look. And I have to say that absolutely the Dice of Decision 2 is much expanded. It's probably a little more complicated than the first version, but for probably good reasons. And it is certainly more robust. A lot more options, a lot more types of things can happen. And almost to me, this sells the whole package. I mean, this is almost worth the whole kit and caboodle, because you can play the Axis Empires, you can play the World War II that we know, but the amount of neat things that can happen and just be different is honestly very, very cool. And you can even decide, I don't even want to roll for these things. So that's part of the fun. You randomly generate what the world situation is in 1937. You could just choose it just to see how it plays, right? You say, I want it, say you play a World War I game that you really like. Fatal Alliances, Balance of Powers, whatever. You play World War I, And maybe you're playing the Central Powers and you win the game. You say, well, I want to see what happens in the world after that. Well, you could go into here, right? Go into the dice of decision system and just pick. Don't roll the die, just pick. Say, we're going to say Central Powers 1, 1917, or thereabouts, pick the option that makes the most sense. And you're going to apply, and then you start rolling on things that are out of your control. And you could come up with something resembling a authentic feeling carry-on of that old history of what if the Central Powers won World War I. And then you can play the resulting World War II, whatever shape that takes. Though I think almost in all cases, the Second World War that is going to be generated, I think always has Germany as the aggressor. I'm not 100% sure on that. I haven't fully read through every permutation of this thing. But it is very cool. And as somebody who likes, who plays like tabletop role-playing games and is used to like being the dungeon master or game master and rolling on tables and all those things, having something similar to just create your war game scenario is just absolutely cool. Like, just awesome. Just great. I absolutely am in love with the idea, and having seen the material, I'm like, I'm good to go. I think the only thing that's keeping me, I haven't pledged yet because I'm like timing expenditures and trying to figure out like when do I think this is gonna charge. I mean, I'm good for it. I'm really not that worried, but I don't know. I guess I should. What I'm probably gonna do is I'm gonna pledge when I'm done recording this video, because I'm sold on it. I'm ready to go. I look forward to what this all looks like together. Now, just going off of the information that I have on the base games, like, I'm not crazy about the map. It's not my favorite map. I think things are done in a very abstract way for, like, markers, in that the factors all range from like 1 to 4. There's not a whole lot of variation within that. I mean, there's certain things where I'm like, oh, well, because I like whiff, that's influencing how I see this game. But I think when you look at all the possible permutations of the way that the game could play out, the events, the fact that production is dealt with in a very clean way via the cards. It's not a card-driven game. It's like a card-assisted game. That's a very distinct difference, but the cards do matter a lot. I think it strikes a really good balance of, like, yeah, you're going to be doing a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. The game's going to take a while, potentially 60 hours, depending on how you want to look at it. This apparently takes 900 minutes. I'm not sure what the real scale is here. It's hard to judge what the real timing is going to be, if it's 60 hours for the full campaign and all the fixins thrown in. But it's not going to be as complex as World in Flames, so if somebody can't handle that but wants to play a big World War II game with me, I think this is a great alternative. And then that random campaign generator just provides a lot of interesting ideas that you can play out just to see how things would go in those given circumstances. I think that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun for solitaire, right? I mean, there's a lot of potential there. But it's still a level above something like Unconditional Surrender, where I feel like Unconditional Surrender wrapped, and this is not a knock against the game, because I know a lot of people like it, and I think it's a fine game. Unconditional Surrender sort of wrapped itself around an axle of simplifying combat, but having really weirdly complex, like, political rules, where you almost put, like, this glossy covering over the warfare, and then it's, you have to read all these weird edge case things for the political rules that aren't terribly complicated, but it's just this weird balance. I think this strikes a really solid balance between those extremes, where you still get a pretty meaty World War II experience, to some degree anyway. Like, it's not the most complex thing. It's not OCS. It's not World in Flames with everything turned on, but you're going to get a pretty good feel. It's not going to be terribly complex, and then there's just a lot of those options to tweak stuff, and I like that. I have very good feelings about the game itself. I know that some folks look down at Decision Games for a certain reason. I would say, just based on, like, the people involved in this, I have a pretty good feeling that the product's going to end up being a pretty solid package. Fingers crossed on that. So, big thanks to Thomas Prowl for letting me take a look at what's coming. I'm just enthused by it for sure. So I recommend, if you haven't looked at this, take a look. Based on what I've seen, and I can't share what I've seen really. I feel like I sort of got like the inside track on it a little bit. It's all looking pretty good. And now, what I saw was not even like the latest what's going to be printed, but it was pretty close, and I'm liking what I'm seeing. Now, my understanding is that this is set to be printed or delivered sometime in like summer 2022. So you're really looking at like 7 months out. You still got like 6 months to pre-order. You can hold off. You can go in. I'll probably go in. It's not going to come out right away, and here's fingers crossed we don't have any delays. So if it's coming in 2022, awesome, good news, great stuff, going to be great. If you have to wait a little bit longer, then well, I guess that's just longer amount of time for things to cook and get refined and polished, if that's the case. But I'm really hyped on it just because of that random campaign generator, and I even feel like you could try to use it for other World War II games. There's a lot of stuff that is not going to make any sense. Like, it would not work 1-to-1. You couldn't just go through Dice Up Decision 2 and like immediately apply what you've found in the rolls to like World in Flames. But I think what you could do is you could make a pretty educated translation in World in Flames, right? You say like, oh, it's Germany, and it's an imperial Germany, not Nazi Germany, and they kept control of the Danzig corridor and parts of Poland, and like you can mark that on a map of World in Flames, right? Like you could kind of make a decision and kind of work that out with your friends and apply it to World in Flames. So it's almost like, I mean, to me, if you tried hard enough, this does not have to be a Totaler Creek only or Axis Empires only thing. You could probably figure out a way to make this work. And could even be, and I'm like getting crazy here, right? You could even maybe try to use this to translate your results of your Fatal Alliances game to World in Flames. I don't know how well that would work. You would probably want some guidance. It would mean that you're abandoning Days of Decision for your World in Flames game, which currently, the current version of Days of Decision doesn't 100% line up with the current version of World in Flames anyway, so I don't know. I just think it's very cool. You can tell I'm just a big dork about it, but very much looking forward to this piece of it more than almost anything. Very cool stuff. Very much looking forward to it. Which brings me to sort of my last topic, which I had a little bit of a segue there referencing being a game master, dungeon master, and rolling on tables. While I was visiting family and being out and about a little bit, I got to run some tabletop RPGs, some old school D&D, and had a huge amount of fun. And that's something that I feel like on the channel, like I literally don't talk about at all. It is totally something that is off in another part of my nerdy life that I've not covered on the channel, which is for decades I've been, it's weird to think of it that way, it is multiple decades at this point. For multiple decades I've been a tabletop role-playing game guy. Longer than I've been in war games, though I'm sure plenty of people understand and appreciate that Dungeons & Dragons, tabletop role-playing games, have a lineage to war games. They have a relation to war games and how they started. So if you like one, you might like the other, and if you haven't tried one and you like the other, hey, there's potential for some crossover there, right? And this is the tough thing. It's like if I start talking about tabletop role-playing games, I could keep going, right? And the thing is, it's sort of the reason why I've contemplated changing my channel name and creating a separate channel specific to tabletop role-playing games, because I have bookshelves of tabletop role-playing game stuff. I've played different kinds of D&D, different kinds of tabletop role-playing games over the years. I could be doing reviews for books and all that kind of stuff, but I've never done it. I've never pulled that trigger. But I certainly could try that at some point, but doing that would mean like, okay, I rename this channel to Steve's War Game channel, and then I go have a Steve's Tabletop Role-Playing Game channel because, yeah, some people who are watching this video probably aren't into RPGs. That's okay. It's not for everybody. And if I start doing content for that, then it's going to dilute your YouTube feed for seeing war game stuff. And maybe just, if you like both, then you can subscribe to both channels, and then you're getting it, you're getting the way you want it. So it's something weighing on my mind, but I thought I'd at least give a little bit of time in this video to that. So if you don't care about tabletop role-playing games at all, and you just don't want to hear about any of this, you can stop the video now. You're 45 minutes in. Congrats for sticking around this long. We'll catch you in the next one. If you like tabletop role-playing games, or you are interested in them, then stick around. We'll talk a little bit about them. So, I mean, this is truly a hobby that I've been with for a very long time. And I played a lot of different versions. I started playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition with friends in high school because that's what they had. So it was like their dad's RPG books, and so they had that, and we played that. But then, once I actually had some of my own money to spend, I had gotten into 3rd Edition, which was really the edition that was being published at the time, but that cost, money to get into. And I didn't have my own 2nd Edition books because they were my buddies. So it was like, if I really wanted to keep playing this hobby, and if my friends moved or I had different friends or whatever the case was, like, I would have to buy into the hobby. And at the time, really my only option was buying 3rd Edition stuff, or at least that's how I perceived it. Not, the market for secondhand books wasn't great where I lived at the time. So that was the way. So, I played 2nd Edition, then I started playing 3rd Edition, really 3.5 of Dungeons & Dragons. 4th Edition I did not like, and then I was playing Pathfinder for a number of years. Pathfinder sort of being a modified 3.5. And then at some point, and I think this was around like 2012 or 13, probably about 2012 or 2013, I really got turned on to the old school revival, renaissance, whatever you want to call it, old school rules movement that had sort of started up, where folks were reevaluating older editions and latching onto that and enjoying the simplicity of the systems, leveraging that to execute on creativity with greater ease, where some of the newer systems are so complex and have so many numbers and constraints that even if you're creative and you're coming up with neat ideas, you have to work within these frameworks, which is really difficult. And I found that when I was playing things like Pathfinder or 3.5, a lot of people were like so heavily focused on creating character builds, almost like a video game, and figuring out these weird combinations of abilities that became, overpowered, and you could multi-class, so you could be a cleric for a while, and then you switch classes, and you took levels in fighter, and then you switch back to whatever, and they were never really role-play reasons, they were just to make a really good video game character, is how it felt a lot of the time. And so going back to kind of the systems that I was familiar with from playing 2nd Edition, which when we talk about old school revival, they're really referencing a lot of the, like, either original edition of D&D, white box stuff, or wood grain box stuff, or they're talking about 1st edition D&D, or they're talking about what is referred to as the basic and expert D&D that was around in the early 80s, 81, 83, had a very specific kind of D&D. Like, it had certain rules wrapped around it. And so I'll say for the most part, but not, I'll say a lot of the OSR stuff is centered around the BX, basic expert, 1980s, early 80s version of D&D. And I found that is a really good one to use because it is relatively simple. It allows you to do dungeon crawling. It allows you to do other types of adventures, but all within a pretty straightforward sort of rule set, but allows you to have a lot of creativity in changing it because the systems are not terribly complex. And sometimes you can even get into, like, there's a sequence of play. You follow the sequence of play almost like a war game. You can guide people through the process of playing the game and have a lot of fun with it. And so back in 2012, 2013, you had a lot of these, they're referred to as retro clones, where they are pretty much the rules of D&D from that time frame, but with a different name for licensing reasons. But via some legal documents, you can replicate the rules. You just can't call it D&D, but you can release rules for that. And so these clones were created that mimicked a particular version of Dungeons and Dragons, and by producing those things, it sort of reignited a whole movement of independent publishers publishing adventures, alternative rule sets, modifications of rule sets that are all, for the most part, interchangeably usable. So like, knowing as long as it's like old school rules oriented, I can pick whichever version of the rules I really like, and I'm showing one on screen right now, which is called Old School Essentials. I can pick that as my system because I just like that system, or I like the way it's written. And then I can just pick whatever adventures or monster books or whatever that I really like, and they're pretty much going to translate pretty well and work with each other really well. And so you almost have this ever-growing arsenal of products and content to use for your tabletop role-playing game campaign, and I've just really liked that. So over the years, I've really steered in that direction. And what's funny is like the 5th edition of D&D does take nods from the old school mentality, mixing it with a bit of like 3rd edition, to where like 5th edition is this happy balance that everyone can kind of latch onto to a certain degree and have a pretty good time. But you give me my choice, I'm still going to pick something like Old School Essentials. And so this is published by Necrotic Gnome. I have no affiliation with them. I have joined the Kickstarters to get certain books printed. This is, I think, a really great one. So if you're, I don't know who, for the audience who's watching this video, I have no idea if this will be very useful to you, but Old School Essentials is what I ran for family members last month, and we had a great time. I had some family members who were trying to play like 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons because my nephew is into that or is trying to get into it, and a lot of folks just had a harder time trying to learn all the rules, and there's a lot more complexity, and especially with adults, like you can't expect some folks to be reading a 300-page player's handbook. That's just not going to happen. What's nice about this is that almost all the rules that matter, the game master just needs to know. The player just needs to know who they are, what they do at a very basic level, and the gameplay is really them just saying what they want to do and it being adjudicated, which is in very stark opposition to a lot of what you see in the newer school design philosophy, where a player is going to pick from this huge list of feats and skills and take points in this and that, and it takes you a whole session just to create characters, where it's like, hey, within a span of half an hour you should have, even as a new player, a character and equipment selected and have a pretty good idea of what your character can do. This specifically Old School Essentials leans heavily on that basic expert, or it basically is basic and expert D&D from 81 through 83. So it is, you can read the advertising tags here, right? Simple, robust rules, easy to learn and reference, compatible with decades of material, both old and new. So stuff from the 80s you can use with this, and there is a whole host of new stuff being published all the time. You can find most of it on drivethrurpg.com. Tons and tons of stuff that is coming out for this. And I think the reason why, I'll just say, like, I have a couple different rule sets that are considered old school. They're all really cool and fun. Crypts and Things is cool. Astonishing Swordsman and Something of Hyperborea is pretty good. Swords and Wizardry is good. They're all good. I really like Old School Essentials because the way, and I don't know if they're going to have any examples on this page, probably not. What's so great about Old School Essentials is they've really committed to a quick-to-read format based on control panels. Side-by-side pages presenting a single topic in its entirety. So if you're playing at the table, whether you're using a PDF or a physical book, you can have the book open or the PDF open and have like 2 pages side-by-side that really give you everything you need to know for a particular topic when it comes up. So usability at the table is absolutely great. It is awesome. Better than any other book I've ever had for that kind of thing. And that makes running it simple as pie. Running Old School Essentials is easy. It is not terribly complicated. You do want to know kind of the way things are supposed to work, so you kind of have to read through the rules a good bit, like any game master or dungeon master should. But the players don't really need to worry about much at all, and you can really get right to the adventuring, the problem solving, solving problems not with your character sheet, but with your own cleverness, and it's just a lot of fun. And there's some great adventures that are from Necrotic Gnome. I'm not gonna simp for them this whole video. I just think this is a really great product, really cool thing, and probably part of the reason I haven't recorded a lot of wargame stuff the last couple of weeks is because we had so much fun playing Old School Essentials that like my brain is on a tabletop role-playing game kick right now, where I'm just enjoying and immersing myself in this stuff again. And we're even talking about trying to do a virtual campaign and playing it some more because it just gone so well. So, if you haven't played Dungeons and Dragons in a while, I mean, okay, I realize some people don't even like Dungeons and Dragons, right? You like RuneQuest, you like Traveler, you like, gosh, there's so many role systems out there, right? Play what works for you. But if you're interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons in terms of like an old school style, really simple, really easy to get new players involved, kids are going to have a lot easier time learning this than a 300-page player's handbook version of the game. You can really run whatever kind of adventure you want, or things that you want. This is fantasy. There's other stuff out there in the old school flavor that is sci-fi, that is gamma, that weird future kind of stuff. There's so much stuff out there. I think this is a really good place to start. So I don't know, guys. If tabletop role-playing games are something that you are interested in and you would like to see more stuff from me in that vein, let me know in the comment section down below, because I'm just at that point where I'm like, well, I could spend more time talking about this stuff. I do like it a lot. But it would really need to be on its own channel, in which case I would have to create a new channel, not hard to do, rename these channels accordingly so that they make sense for people watching, and do a quick video advertising the new channel on this channel to let you know where to go if you want to see that stuff. And I don't necessarily see it as it's going to take time away from wargaming, because the reality is, any time I spend playing role-playing games is not the time I spend playing war games. That's the reality. They're just very different time frames and time sets of my time. Like, I'm still playing World in Flames with some of my friends once a month or twice a month. I'm not doing very well, by the way. I love Whiff. I'm not good at Whiff. That's the distinction. But that doesn't necessarily take time away from, like, my solitaire wargaming here in the game room on camera, and it wouldn't really necessarily take time away where I'm playing a tabletop role-playing game or even talking about it, but it is maybe, it's that recording time that would be different. Like if I review a book or I do something or other, like, yeah, maybe that's time, my limited free time I'm spending recording that rather than recording another turn of an OCS game I'm playing or something like that. So I don't know. It's tough because, again, I've been playing tabletop role-playing games in some fashion for like 20 years, and it makes sense that, gosh, this hobby that I'm so invested in that I never talk about, maybe I should be talking about in a different context. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. If there's not enough interest, then I just stick to war games, and it's just that easy, man. There's enough wargaming to be done for sure to fill up my time. So anyway, just sharing the goodness, the good vibes on the fantasy RPG stuff. Again, Old School Essentials I think is a really great way to break into it if you're new to it. If you're not new to it and you haven't given it a look, I think on the formatting alone, this product is worth its weight in gold. And you can read all about the different sets of books that are available, different formats of things. The PDFs are not terribly expensive. I definitely think Necrotic Gnome deserves all the recognition that they get for this product, because it's one thing to take a set of rules that already exist. It's another thing to refine those rules in the format to peak perfection, and that is the value that this product provides. And the art's cool. I mean, it's cool art. It's got cool art, and if I'm going to plug them even for another second, their adventures are top-notch. So even if you don't want to use the Old School Essential system for your whole home game, These adventures are just awesome. It just like it is crazy how good these adventures are, and they're not very thick books. Like if I had them on camera, maybe I'll do another video at some point. And I'll show these books on camera, physical books. They're small books. They're not big. They're little digest, books. But the adventures are just so good, and they're so easy to run. In particular, I thought I did run Winter's Daughter. This is a fantastic adventure. I really liked it. It is really good for the audience that I ran it for, which is a mixture of, some teenage kids, but some adults and some relatively, innocent adults who, aren't into fantasy, aren't like looking to relive Lord of the Rings or whatever. It's just this kind of neat fantasy, weird setting of Dolmenwood, and it just was a really great adventure to run. I think Gavin Norman, who's the guy behind Necrotic Gnome, he does a fantastic job writing adventures that have synergy with the old school essential system, where if you're a decent dungeon master, game master, whatever, you can riff off of the room descriptions really well. It is really easy to reference. You're only looking at a couple pages at a time, and you've got everything you need to run encounters and the puzzles or the encounters or whatever. All really, really cool stuff. I mean, I said I wasn't going to simp. I'm totally fanboy on old school essentials at this point. Really great stuff. I'm going to continue sending my RPG fund money this way whenever I feel like I'm capable of doing so. Really great stuff. So, all right, guys. I know this is a long video. It's cranking out at over an hour. If you sat through the whole thing, thank you so much. Congratulations to you. You are a stalwart listener, and I appreciate that very much. Again, sorry for the long gap in my presence. Again, all things are going well in my space, and I look forward to doing some more wargame videos very, very, very soon. And with the holidays coming up, I mean, who knows? Curveballs are going to be what they are, but maybe I'll have some free time via the holidays to crank out a lot of material. Sometimes that can happen. I can get out a lot just because I've afforded myself that free time that I've not had in the last couple of weeks. So, anyway, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. We will see you on the next video, guys. Take care. Keep on gaming.